video here. In fact, I'm flipping it over. Okay. One question. How many turns of the screw are there? Well, that's what one character says. That would be 2 turns. But is that all? Are there more turns? And if there are, where do they happen? Okay, so as Feldman points out, this is a related topic. The title of the story reappears twice. Once in the prologue, and later it's said by the governess in the story itself. So the question would be, what is happening with the title? Why does James make a point in the prologue of saying there is no title, just after it's actually been introduced, and of course the reader's already seen it? So, and then you could talk about how the title returns. Okay, a related topic. Feldman refers to the prologue, and she says it's a frame. And then it's like a frame, but then she just refers to it as the frame and the prologue. But my question is, does the story actually have a prologue? The numbering only begins after the first chapter. The second chapter is called chapter 1, when we start hearing from the governess. So, and Douglas says he has to give a few words of prologue. So in a way, whatever prologue is there is inside what Feldman is calling the prologue. So in a lot of stories, there are like tons of stories, novels, that begin with the discovery of a manuscript. It's called a found manuscript. For example, the Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter begins with a chapter called The Customs House, in which the narrator says that he retrieved the novel that you're about to read, which was written contemporaneously with the lives of the characters. So that is, and there are a lot of other examples where there's a word like prologue, preface. Washington Irving, the guy who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, also he used pseudonyms. And when he used one of them to publish one of his first works on the history of New York, it's also a found manuscript, and he also has a preface. So that's part of the convention, and it's part of the convention which James is not following. It's something that Feldman, I think, isn't reading closely enough. So the concept, there'd be a related question, what does it matter that James doesn't refer to his prologue as prologue, so that if we refer to it as a prologue, we're technically mistaken, or maybe it's a matter of indifference. Okay, final one. Oh yes, go ahead.
What's the word count of these?
Oh, okay, let me just get to that in a second. Remember to ask me, Larkin, if I forget. Okay, last one. How many, if there are ghosts in the Turn of the Screw, how many are there? And why? You'll notice that Feldman starts to refer to characters in like the Master in the last section as ghosts. And she calls the ship that the governess talks about being, I was a drifting ship, and I was strangely at the helm. She starts to call that a phantom ship. So is there a kind of ghosting, not the way that we mean it, exactly today, but is there sort of some kind of spectral effect that Feldman is onto, even if she doesn't substantiate it? Okay, and so one place to look for this is to go back to the prologue and think about how it is narrated both posthumously and anthemously. Posthumous right after death, anthemous while you're still alive. So first, the first narrator, the I, which I also think Feldman is totally mistaken about. That's not James. Moby Dick begins, "Call me Ishmael." That doesn't mean because it's the first person narrator that it's Melville. So anyway, that's another, I guess you could try to argue that one. Anyway, so we begin with an anthemous narration about this tale being told in the past. Then it has to be retrieved. Then we learn that the governess transmitted it sometime before her death. Feldman says on her deathbed, but James does not say that. He just says before her death. Okay, so the narration, then Douglas died and gave it to the narrator. And then the narrator goes back to the moment that he began the first 0 chapter and continues with what is actually a posthumous narration, the memory of what is now a posthumous narration. So there's this kind of, there are all these distinctions that Feldman says that the novella sets up and then deconstructs. In other words, they don't hold up, that one collapses into the other. There's the interiorizing of the exterior, there's the exteriorizing of the interior, that kind of thing. It's always in motion. She says you never really stop this chain, which is called this chain of signifiers. One thing she doesn't address, though, is the relation between anthemous and posthumous narrators, and she doesn't take up the question, although this would be a complicated one to take up, of the fact that Douglas is reading aloud the story that we're going to begin to read by the governess, which is in her first person narration. I think everyone who reads it forgets that and just imagines hearing a woman's voice. Because it's just too hard to wait, how do you translate this into a male's voice, and what would that be and how it would be different? But it is, one other thing that Feldman skips over in this chain is that Douglas says, when he's asked by the narrator, do you have a record? And he says, no, I have the impression. I have it here in his heart. So he has an impression, which is like, that's what typing keys do that's what pens do to paper. It's your, signature. It's also an impression. It can mean other things too. But in that context, a record, an impression, and he hasn't lost it, he says. So he seems to have a perfectly intact memory of the governess, the written account that he is now going to read. But he's very scrupulous, and he insists on the manuscript being retrieved from the locked drawer, waiting, so that he can, instead of just giving his remembered version, give us firsthand what the governess said. Okay, that's the last topic. I can probably think of more, Okay, back to Larkin's question. I don't want it to be over 500 pages. Freudian slip. For 500 words.
Thank you.
500 words. Now, I ask you to write short letters because this is something you have to do in life often. outside of literature classes, outside of writing about literature, like Shoshana Feldman writes 103 pages. But say she's going to court over some copyright issue. Her lawyer is going to have to read 106 or whatever it is pages and bill you for all the hours that the attorney spent reading it. So I hope you never have any brush with the law, and my advice is never go to court because there's no relationship between justice and the law. You might luck out if you want, but it's very challenging. Anyway, so you would want, like, what she could do is just give the chapter titles. That would be shrinking the essay, and that would be what you would want to. Right now, clearly that's not enough to write because they're just titles. That could be a novel, though. It could be a short story. My story about how I wrote a publication that consisted only of titles. It would be a very short story. My very short story about titles in a really great essay I wrote, but I'd never published. Okay, that's kind of intriguing. So make sure every word counts. Doesn't mean your sentence could be long. I'm not saying write sentences like see Jane run. Okay? And you can have complicated punctuation and so on. You can write like James Joyce. I mean, you can write creatively. You just have to be clear so that anyone else could say back to you, so you're saying this, right? And they would say, and then you would say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. So there would be no problem. Okay, I have one last topic which will set off our discussion, which I'm sorry I prolonged or postponed for so long. And that is, do you think Feldman, who is, let me say, incredibly brilliant, and has written this magisterial essay. She has, just such an impressive command of Freud's works, of Jacques Lacan's works, of The Turn of the Screw, of Henry James' other works. She's a very good close reader, super intelligent. Nevertheless, the question I would raise is, does Feldman's essay go screwy? And if so, how would you argue that it is? It does. So the one piece of evidence could be, the immediate piece of evidence, the length of the essay. How often she repeats herself. Anyway. So in other words, you could read her essay. I don't think many of you will do this paper topic, but you could read it as closely as she reads The Turn of the Screw and other critics who precede her, who have written on The Turn of the Screw. Okay, take it away. That's it.